welcome to this evening's bedtime story. So this is day 71 of the Architecture Foundation's 100-day studio. I'm Scott McAulay. I'm both kind of surprised to have been asked and delighted to have been given the chance to read for you. So huge thanks to Alicia Pivaro for that invitation. So what I do is I coordinate the Anthropocene Architecture School. This is a kind of Glasgow-born initiative that's a school of activism, architecture and climate literacy. And what it essentially does is address architecture's knowledge gaps in climate literacy and sustainable design. So this is pretty much supporting educators, students, practitioners, built environment professionals, the public at large, and really just educating like the house is actually on fire. So for tonight's bedtime story, I'm going to be reading you a selection of kind of excerpts from Letters to the Earth, Writing to a Planet in Crisis, and this has been published by Culture Declares Emergency. So it's a really kind of emotionally powerful collection of kind of people's individual thoughts, feelings, responses, poems to the kind of crisis that we're facing widely in the kind of climate terms. So the impact that's kind of had on my work has been a kind of more compassionate reassurance and inspiration. So when I was asked to read something that kind of gave me a bit of guidance, it's more that kind of emotional tempering to my work. So the kind of the phrase climate crisis, as we use it now, has become very blurred. So we're all kind of used to that relentless downpour of statistics and then the kind of the onslaught of placards on social media feeds as well. But for my own kind of emotional response and just response in general, that has been kind of panic for years, it's been anxiety. But then as the sort of IPCC report came out, that became a kind of a grief, and processing that took a very long time. But this book and the sort of things it encourages within it was something that really helped with that. So that's something that I kind of brought into my work. So how I address teaching people about responding to the climate crisis in architecture is very much inspired by this book. So kind of for years at the moment, we've been bombarded by kind of documentaries and statistics, but we're rarely asked to emotionally connect with the climate crisis. And in the same respect, we've not really been asked to engage with the emotional side of the COVID crisis either. So we're not really invited to explore those feelings. And my kind of take on this is, what if after the pause that that's been imposed by COVID-19 crisis, if all architects and students, practitioners, educators were to really engage their emotional response to the wider climate crisis as well? Because if you think about that, if everyone was to take that time, it could be really culturally transformative for architecture. So not just as how we work in the built environment, but how we respond and work with communities as well. So yeah, this is very new for me. I'm not used to reading to people in this regard. So we'll jump in and I'll try and get 9 or 10 of them read. If I have to stop, I'll put a timer on to make sure I don't go absolutely overboard for you. But at the same time, we should get about 7 or 8 of them. So yeah, let's kick off now. So what's the first one I want to look for? It is... So first of all, I'm going to read A Failure of Imagination, that is by Caroline Lucas, MP. So I'm going to add 2 words to the start of it, just to make it a little bit more relevant for us. So, dear architects and artists and writers and poets and musicians, I'm writing to you to ask if you will help us. Will you help us protect this precious earth, to inspire us to believe that it's not too late to act, to show us that each and every one of us can make a difference, and to convince us that the system can still be changed. I ask this of you because I recognise that politics has failed. As a politician myself, that's not an easy thing to admit. But I know that even those politicians who understand the urgency of making the transition to a zero carbon economy have not succeeded in persuading parliaments around the world to act with the speed and determination that's necessary. In our obsession with policies and procedures and parts per million, we've appealed to the heads but have failed to touch the hearts of the people we represent. Yet the overwhelming question we face today is one that needs not only an intellectual response, but an emotional one too. Why didn't we save ourselves when we had the chance? Those words quite literally haunt me. I wake up in the night with them going over and over in my head. 10 simple words that are spoken by the late great Pete Postlethwaite in the wonderful film The Age of Stupid. He plays one of the few survivors of climate catastrophe in 2055. And as he looks back at reels of television footage, real footage from weather events from the past few years, the typhoons in the Philippines, the heat waves in Australia, the freezing temperatures in the US, he poses as one simple question, and the hairs go up on the back of my neck. It's the most important question of our time. Why is it that we seem to be content to be the species that spent all its time monitoring its own extinction and its willful and knowing destruction of its own fragile and precious home, rather than taking active steps to avoid it? Many reasons have been suggested. The power and vested interests of the fossil fuel companies, for example, who are increasingly not simply lobbying government, but being given senior roles within it. Or that people are just too busy, trying to get by, trying to cope with the latest obscenity from a leadership intent on making the poorest and the most vulnerable pay the highest price for the economic crisis not of their making. Or that we're being bombarded by thousands of advertisements each day, all of them persuading us to go out and consume more, to spend money we don't have on things we don't need to make impressions that don't last. But more than any of these, I think, what stops us from acting is the fact that we rarely have the courage to emotionally connect with the reality of what we're doing to this one beautiful and precious earth. Academically and theoretically, we know the dangers of exceeding 1.5 degrees centigrade of warming. But one of the reasons we don't internalise the reality of that is that we fear the darkness might engulf us if we do. How do we cope with the thought that humanity might not wake up in time? That climate change might become irreversible? That societies, even in the developed world, might no longer have the ability to respond or to cope? How do young people in particular cope with the reality that their parents' generation has brought this earth close to collapse? When we really connect and feel the reality of what we are doing, such feelings of powerlessness, of despair, can be difficult to escape. And that's why we need your help. We need you to paint the positive pictures of how the world could be, and to tell us the vivid and compelling stories that show us that, when people come together and act, there is always hope. We need you to remind us that human beings are endlessly caring and creative and innovative, and that if we choose to, we can set our minds to anything. We despair when we have no stories to describe the present and shape the future. Political failure is, at root, a failure of imagination. But with your help, we can rekindle our imaginations and rediscover the power to act. So, invitation to everyone from that one. And now we're going to go with my absolute favourite one. So this is a nice change from my usual run of graphs and numbers. So this is, but the greatest of these is love. It's finally happening. We're finally talking about climate change. It's messy, but it's happening. And to be honest, we don't really have the language, and that's largely because we don't know how to feel about it. For decades, the dominant narrative has been that we should feel guilt. Then there's a dual narrative that calls for hope. Others have called for fear or for panic. I myself am on the record calling for anger. But I don't always feel angry, to tell the truth. In fact, sometimes I'm hopeful, and sometimes I'm scared. Sometimes I'm overwhelmed, and sometimes I'm downright stubborn. My mama would tell you that's pretty much all the time. That's because none of these emotions really get to the heart of what I truly feel. None of them are big enough. If I'm honest with myself, what I truly feel is love. And hear me out now. I don't mean any simple, sappy kind of love. I don't mean anything cute or tame. I mean living, breathing, heart-beating love. Wild love. Listen, love is not a noun, she is an action verb. She can shoot stars from the sky and she can spark a movement. She can sustain a revolution. I love this beautiful, mysterious, complicated planet we get to call home. The planet who had the audacity to burst with life from her boreal crown to her icy toes at the South Pole. I love her caves and her valleys and her rivers and her oceans. I love the majesty of larger-than-life elephants and whales and rhinos and lions. I love the elegance and enigma of all the different kinds of bats, even the ones that eat other bats. I love the unapologetic sass of butterflies and hummingbirds and coral reefs, and the tear-jerking aroma of flowers that bloom below the equator. I love that nighttime symphony on steamy southern nights, when the frogs croak and the crickets sing and the owls hunt. I love the taste of watermelon and blackberries in the summer, the way that they ooze down the side of my face when they're perfectly ripe. I love the delicate feel of honeysuckle petals on the warm, grainy earth and dewy grass on my bare feet. I love sitting on my mama's back porch in Mississippi to watch God do his work, in the form of late summer thunderstorms underneath a thick blanket of humidity. I love the late summer haze when all the colours come to life and seem to throb. And I love my mama. I love my family. I love my niece and nephew, and I love that it doesn't matter that their parents are actually my cousins and not my siblings. I love my Aunt Joyce's laugh, my cousin Candice's freckles, and my Aunt Karen's voice. I love, dare I say it, myself. And some days it's easier to do that than others, and some days it feels truly impossible. But it's a work in progress, and I'm working on it, okay? And love like this doesn't live in your heart. She's too big for that. She's in your blood, your bones, she's in your DNA, the places where people think racism is. She envelops you with an impenetrable armour. When you love something or someone that much, of course you're frightened when you see her under attack, and of course you're furious at anyone or anything that would dare to harm her. I'm furious that my mother is in more and more danger every hurricane season, and I am terrified at the thought of living through my old age, when my body aches the way my mother's does now, in an unpredictable environment of disaster at every turn. What happens when my knees don't have enough spring left in them to run from a wildfire? What happens when I've lost it all in a flood, but I'm too old to work again? But this love is strong enough to break through the terror. She is hot enough to burn through anger and turn into fury. She can shake you out of your despair and propel you to the very front of the battlefield. As a love that can also, in the teeth of these most insurmountable odds, give me hope, if I'm brave enough to accept it. I've seen her looking back at me in the eyes of some of the bravest climate justice warriors I've ever met, and I can feel that tickling tingle of maybe, just maybe, we'll be okay. A love like this doesn't seek peace or even vengeance. She seeks justice, and she's strong enough, ferocious enough, and brave enough to burn this bitch to the ground. By Mary Inez Heglar. Right, this one's called Livable. To Earth. You only just became livable for so many of us. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. People of colour. Disabled people. People from all marginalised groups who've only just been able to start to try and live full and happy lives. I am so sorry that with all the space you've given us, we haven't respected you back. To people who live on Earth. Don't take our communities away. Don't take our spaces away. The world is only just getting good for so very many of us. Sustain the Earth so it can get even better. And Casper Taylor. And this next one is called A New Civilization, and it's by Julia Steinberger, Professor of Social Ecology and Ecological Economics at the University of Leeds. Dear life, I was not aware when I was born that I was born onto a battlefield, and I was not aware as I learned to walk that I was stomping over the habitats of many creatures. I was not aware as my mother drove me to school that we were riding roughshod over the unmarked graves of our fellow humans. I was not aware as we flew around the world that I was attacking my child's chances. I was not taught when I went to school that we had all been drafted, an unwilling and unwitting child soldiers, into an army of destruction. I didn't read in any of my university books that my civilization of towering buildings, zooming machines, and feasting on the meat of other creatures was waging a bitter war against the promise of a possible future. But now I know. I can see we were fooled, tricked into believing that shiny, sprawling suburbia and industrial zones and manure lagoons and mines and drilling rigs were our new habitat. I can see how we were blinded by fossil fuel barons and captains of industry into thinking that cars and planes could possibly replace the earth under our feet, even the very clean air we breathe. I can see how a culture built on ownership and consumption was merely an excuse, a fig leaf for the rich and powerful to accumulate ever more profits and power, leaving destruction and destitution in our wake, and a forever blighted future. I can see so many others waking up to the reality we face, of this desperate moment in time. I see their grief, their horror, their determination, their fragile hope as they realise they are not alone, and that their actions and words still matter, will still make a difference. I see them look around and searching for ways their energy and voice can be of use, desperate to join in the struggle for a possible future. So now, I know. I was born onto a battlefield, But in this battle, I am not alone. With millions and millions of fellow humans, I am heeding the call of a different destiny. A destiny not of consumption, not of burning the past and harming the future, but a destiny built on action and activism, on collaboration and cooperation. A new civilization centered on preserving life. Every morning, I wake from nightmares of rising doom and harm. I'm drawn to the work of the day by the beckoning of you all, companions in this irresistible and immense task, by the lure of the struggle against the forces of fossil destruction, by the promise of this new future in whose service we are called by life itself. And this next one's called 13. Dear little sister, today I will walk out of school with the thousands in my city and millions around the world and shout and stand up for the future of our planet, for the change of the powerful and the greedy, for the seas and her creatures who have died from our plastic nooses, for the land and her magnificent grey beasts and regal cats who die from our lethal greed. I will wonder when you turn 13, 12 years from now. What will you see? Have the people given up? Is our planet dying? Is the air we breathe as toxic and vile as cigarette smoke? The rainforest no longer lush and enchanting but broken and burned? The weather violently protesting to the poison we have fed it? We have the answers, the solutions and the methods. The scientists found them, the children cry them, and the politicians ignore them. Tia Kobadokis, aged 15. And this next one's called Enterprise. As the climate changes, the finance we refuse will seem small. It costs more to mend a body wrecked than to break its fall. Now that our body is failing, flailing limbs of blue and juniper green, dropping to the jaws of a hurricane, the leg will suffer what the foot has done, and the arm, the hand, and the shoulder, the neck, the waters and land a foreboded wreck. Mitigation and money are sisters. Together they'll nurse the world, mending the cracks, aligning the spine and supporting the back, caring for the skin as it meets with the skies, knowing where to begin, raising clean enterprise, like open palms that say, tomorrow will be better if you prepare for it today. By Rakea Fertuga. So next is the Age of Restoration. And we're going to get through all the ones I hoped for, so I've not gone too fast. So, Dear Earth, as one mother to another, I want to apologise for the mess we humans have made. In just a few hundred years, we have burned down your forests, poisoned your waters, acidified the oceans, melted glaciers and ice caps, and managed to upset the delicate chemistry of the entire atmosphere. But here's the good news. We've already worked out you're 4.6 billion years old, gone to the moon and Mars and sent messages deep into the universe to tell everyone about life on Earth. Something magical is happening too. Millions of ordinary people, especially our children, are rebelling against the old ways of thinking. Ways that led humanity to death, destruction, and the glorification of the domination of nature. We've finally understood that everything and everyone is connected. We understood that ending domination of nature goes hand in hand with tackling all forms of domination and hierarchy. The struggle to honour you, our shared home, and to achieve ecological balance and justice goes hand in hand with achieving racial, gender, sexual and economic equality. These struggles are linked, and the movements to achieve them need to join up and overturn the prevailing order. That is actually quite a leap in understanding. It's happened because we have allowed our creative curiosity to see you, dear Earth, and ourselves with new eyes, to see your abundance and how it could be to provide for the needs of all and not just the few. More power from the sun hits you, dear Earth, in a single hour than humanity uses an entire year. We are trying to figure out how to harness that through solar panels and the like, so we no longer have to rely on digging up coal, gas and oil. Once we have this power, we can generate and store clean water, so no one has to face drought or famine ever again. But we can't get to that point till all of us unleash our imaginations. Too many people are panicking and either looking to the past for solutions or see salvation only through the view. It's bizarre that it's easier for us to put a man on the moon than to imagine a kinder, inclusive and more equitable global society here on Earth. I'm certain that in the end, those who are panicking or trapped in the past will not have the upper hand. There is hope in the millions rebelling all over the world. Our artists, indigenous peoples, wisdom keepers from myriad lineages, young and old people everywhere are forging new alliances, networks and coalitions. They are figuring out how we can care for each other even if the benevolent life conditions you created for us get harsher. It's an exciting time to be alive, to witness the conscious co-creation of a new era of humanity. Bear with us, dear Earth. The age of restoration and respect is almost here. Now this one is the future. Dear mortals, I know you are busy with your colourful lives. You grow quickly bored and detest moralising. I have no wish to waste the little time that remains on arguments and heated debates. I wish I could entertain you with some magnificent propositions and glorious jokes, but the best I can do is this. I haven't happened yet, but I will. I am the future, but before I appear, please close the scrolls of information, let the laptop sleep, sit still and shut your eyes, and listen. Things are going to change. Don't open your eyes, not just yet. I'm not trying to frighten you. Think of me not as a wish or a nightmare, but as a story you have to tell yourself, not with an ending, in which everyone lives happily ever after, or a B-movie apocalypse, but maybe starting with the line, to be continued, and see what happens next. Remember this, I am not written in stone, but in time. So please don't shrug and say, what can we do? It's too late, etc., etc., etc. And dear mortals, you are such strange creatures, with your greed and your kindness, and your hearts like broken toys. You carry fear with you everywhere like a tiny god in its box of shadows. You love shopping and festivals, and good food. You love to dance in the enchantment of time like angels in a forest of mirrors. Your lives are held in the beautiful devices familiar in your hands, and perhaps you lie to yourselves because you're afraid of me. But always remember, we are in this together, face to face and eye to eye. I hold you in my hands as I am held in yours. We are made for each other. Now open your eyes and tell me what you see. By Nick Drake. Right, we are on to our last two, and I have not overshot. Right. So this one is titled, What We Do Now Matters. They are wanting to tell us something, the future people, the people of whom we are the ancestors, yet they are the wiser. They are wanting to tell us that what we do now matters. They want us to know that they see the dismembered ways that we live and how difficult it is for us to remember how to return to the family of all things. But their existence is testament to the fact that it is possible. They know we feel trapped by this system of entanglements and obligations and the amputations of our imaginations in a system that only ever intended to keep us blind to the bars of our cages. But they want to remind us that there was a time when we could not imagine a world order that was not based on the divine right of kings. And before that even, there was a time when we knew that what it was to belong. We knew that we were a land, mantis and dancer. When we knew that we were the firefly and the ocean, the stuff of stars and the breath of birds. They ask us, stroking our hair and touching our faces, how did you know that something else was possible? Where did that idea germinate inside you? Show us, point to the place. Tell us the story of summoning your brothers and sisters to revolt for a life of connection and dignity. For what dignity is possible if dignity is not available for all? They ask us, How did you manage to build this world in the flames of capitalism, and yet all the while you were disconnected from your rituals, from the rhythms and songs of your people, the tiny sacred acts of care that ensure that the world is recreated with every dawn chorus? How did you handle knowing all that you knew without becoming paralysed with terror and despair? What did you do with your despair? Personal, collective, ancestral? How did you carry its magnitude in your heart without becoming overcome with madness, or perhaps while carrying your madness, your addictions, and your chronic sadness, never really knowing the full extent of your vitality? Did you carry pieces of it everywhere you went, stuffed in pockets and purses like used tissues, pulling out every pot and pan as the house flooded with tears? Did you feel it hanging in the air and walking alongside you, the ghosts of extinct creatures around you, reminding you of all that is at stake, suffocating you of the thickness of their memory? Did you taste it in your food, forced from the soil and seas with chemicals and violence? Food that is no longer nourished, but flared up in rashes and welts as it entered your body? Did you feel the suffering as you dressed yourself in the forced labour of people and animals, their exhaustion stitched into the seams and hems of your clothes? We see you, they say, standing on the shore with 500 years of industry and environmental wreckage and slavery and torture at your back, gasping under its weight, with only the vast Black Sea in front of you. We see you. We see you holding the crumbling world in one hand and the germinating seed of life in the other. We know you are listening to your children, to the wind, to the birds, to the voice that startles you from sleep just before dawn, to the harbingers of a new consciousness. We feel how you allow your heart to be broken while every day preparing the house for love, making up her bed, setting a place for her at your table, all with no good reason for hope and every reason for despair. We see what is to come for you, and that what will remain when the storm from which there will be no refuge is over. We see you in the thousands of varieties of potato and corn and wheat, the cornucopia of culture and craft, language and art, the compassion and commitment to the value of the life of the individual and the group. We know what you have known, across time and species, across geography and incarnation. We know what you are capable of. We salute you, because what you do now matters. Claire Russell. And lastly, we have a sea change. You may think that you are simply one small positive droplet in an ocean of troubles, a droplet that can't do anything. But if you search our ever-expanding ocean, you will find millions of other small droplets with the same mindset as yourself. Together you form a sea in an ocean. That sea can stir a storm, and that sea can make a change. Harkaran S.S. Dingra, aged 15. So yeah, thanks again for listening to this kind of evening's bedtime story, and thank you for the opportunity to contribute to the 100-day studio as well. And I'd thoroughly recommend that anyone just dip into Letters to the Earth at any point you get the chance. It used to be my Glasgow subway book because every stop is 2 minutes apart, so you can read a letter or two every kind of journey you take, so it's quite a nice sized book. And just check out what Culture Declares Emergency are doing, because they're really energising the cultural sector, and hopefully architects can kind of take that lead and engage on the kind of the emotional side of what we're facing as well. So just on the kind of parting note, have a great evening, and hopefully with more sort of imagination and connecting to the emotional response, we can energise what we're doing in architecture. So thanks for your time.